We are busy moving on from that, however, was realize that not everybody is at the same place. And why I mention this is there are also people who are starting to come into incarnation at the moment who have their awareness sufficiently evolved that they can actually start going beyond the needs of the individual to start addressing the needs of a group. And that is enormously important. Not because those individuals are more important than the ones who have to work on individual realization. No, that is not what I'm saying. Because in truth, nothing and no one in life is more important or less important than anybody or anything else. But why I mention group consciousness as being so vitally important is that realize that all learning always overlaps. Therefore, if we take the example of a child, let's say, who's in standard 3 at school, call it grade 3, whatever. Now that child will pass that grade with a particular level of expertise. And it will pass on to the higher grade or the higher standard. But it hasn't yet learned everything it needed to in standard 3. So for the first part of being in standard 4, although it's now being introduced to new knowledge, it is having to recapitulate and having to fill in the gaps which it couldn't do in standard 3. And that's why I say all learning always overlaps. So you might now find yourself in grade 4, but for the first part you're still busy learning what you didn't learn in grade 3. And likewise, by the time you get into the second half of grade 4, you're already busy preparing yourself for grade 5. This is how life works. You don't finish this and then move on to the next. There's always an overlapping in learning. So, as the greatest need in the world today is for the individual, or for the realization, rather, of the individual, so there is already, the individual is already being prepared by those who are beginning to look to the well-being of the group. Because the individual must still look at how he fits into the world around him. And there's no better way for him to do this than through the medium of the group. But he couldn't do that if there weren't already those that are busy fostering the well-being of the group. Otherwise he doesn't have a group in which to complete his own learning and his own experience of life. So there's always this overlapping that happens. So, to go back to answer your question in a few words, yes, the greatest need today is still for the individual to come to full realization of him or herself and how he then or she then fits into the greater whole which we call the group. But concurrently with this, there are also already those that are busy fostering the well-being of the group and therefore not having the focus so much on their own individual growth, but rather on their growth as an individual through the medium of the group.
Is this why you mention in your books that we are all equal but different? In that for some people self-realization may be what is meant for them in their lifetime, whereas somebody else may already be a little bit further on down the line, and therefore they need to guide the people coming behind them. So the knowledge is different. Is that what you mean by we are equal but different?
Correct. Correct. Of course, it's not just in that respect that I mean that we're equal but different. I also mean it in terms of gender, male and female. Males and females are not the same. They're different, but they are equal.
Is this why our relationships get so messy? Because some are more equal than others.
Yes, yes. And then, of course, there are also those that try so desperately to make everybody the same, that today everybody's highly confused about whether they should be male or female, or just simply it.
Is this not also part of the biggest challenge that humanity faces, the gender issue?
Indeed, indeed. The confusion surrounding gender has become huge. And of course, we have two main factors contributing to that. First of all, we have male chauvinism of the past, where the female was very much subjugated and made to be a second-class citizen. That didn't help at all. And then there was the backlash. And then we had the so-called female liberation movement, where females were now determined that they could do anything a male could do better. That certainly didn't help either. And then we finally arrived at this unhappy truce, which we have today, where people are desperately trying to annihilate all meaning of gender. So now men have to be like women, and women have to be like men. And nobody understands anymore who's Arthur or who's Martha.
In your role then of bringing light to these type of situations into relationships,
Yes.
do you have a dream, a vision for the world that we're living in at the moment?
Are you speaking specifically about gender?
I'm talking, I feel that gender affects everything,
Yes.
whether we're male or female, but it seems to me that part of why the world seems to be in such a mess at the moment is because none of us know whether we're Arthur or Martha.
Yeah, true.
So if we start with do you have a big vision, and then we can look at it a little bit closer in terms of gender?
Yes. Elizabeth, for me, and it's very hard to put it across in an interview like this, because I have to touch upon subjects which are actually vast. And unless one explains the subjects in their entirety, my words that I'm going to use now can so easily be misconstrued. And it can bring great offense to people that might be listening to this interview, simply because they do not understand where it is that I'm really coming from. But even at that risk, I'm going to try and answer your question. To keep it very simple, we say that the male represents the spirit, the spirit of all of us, both male and female, whereas the female represents our, if you like, the social being. In other words, the being, the incarnated being, who's having to live life on the physical plane. This from a very technical perspective. So we have male representing the indwelling spirit, and we have female representing the being on the physical plane. And of course, what makes us whole, what brings about the totality of the self, is once again the relationship between the indwelling spirit and the incarnated being on the physical plane, between male and female, if we keep it simple. So the accent throughout my teachings is to help people to understand what it is really to be male, what it is to be female. And then just to make life a little bit more complicated, as if that isn't complicated enough, we also have something which we call the relative factor of awareness. Because in reality, all of us, irrespective of our gender, we go throughout our daily lives, fluctuating, depending upon the needs in the moment, between being relatively male or relatively female. The example I can give is in many areas in the business arena today, we have females who are actually the superior of male colleagues. To all intents and purposes, according to the relative factor of awareness, that female superior is masculine relative to her male colleagues. That's what we mean about the relative factor of awareness. And that happens all the time. The other example I can use is mother and child. The mother, although she's female, is relative to her life experience and relative to her knowledge of life. She is masculine relative to her children. This is all what we mean by relative factor of awareness. I take great care in how I approach humanity in terms of the teaching to define clearly what is male, what is female, and then also what is the relative factor of awareness really mean, and how do we work with it in an intelligent way. So when you ask me what is my greater vision is really to bring both males and females to a far deeper understanding of their respective roles, which are true to their gender.